Hello, so in this video we are going to start talking about algebra and what it is. Now, mathematics has lots of different disciplines. For example, there's probability, and probability is the maths of chance. We also have things like geometry, which is the maths of shapes. Well, algebra is kind of the game changer. It was the thing which made maths possible and applicable to so many different situations. Because algebra is the maths of unknowns, okay? So whenever we don't know what the value of something is, algebra allows us to work with it in order to work out its value. For example, let's suppose I walk into a shop and it's a really stupid shop because we don't have any prices on any of the items. But I do know that on one day I buy 3 bananas and 4 apples and it comes to £2.60. Okay. Now obviously I don't know how much 1 banana and 1 apple is, but I do know that on another day I walk in and I buy 6 bananas and 7 apples and it comes to £4.85. Now using this bit of information, I'm able to work backwards and use algebra in order to understand what 1 apple and 1 banana costs. So algebra is really useful for working with values which we don't currently know. We work with them as if they're numbers and we treat them exactly the same way, and eventually the numbers will fall out. But there's another place where algebra is really useful, and it's useful for generalizing. So in maths, you probably realized that we have situations where there's lots of patterns and connections and things, and we're trying to explore those. Well, a lot of the time we notice something and then we think, well, okay, we can use algebra to describe what's happening there. For instance, if I take 3 and I multiply it by 0, now hopefully you know that that should be equal to 0. Equally, if I take 7 and I multiply it by 0, that would still come out as 0. In fact, if I take any number, let's say negative 10, and I multiply it by 0, it will still come out as, guess what, 0. Okay. So now we've noticed a pattern, we can use algebra to describe what's happening here. We can say, well, any number, let's give it a name. Let's call it A. When we multiply it by 0, it should come out as 0. So you can see here that I have used algebra to describe a pattern that I have noticed. Okay. Now to get the terminology into our head, first of all, we have to understand, you notice that I use letters. Really all those letters are is they're just a name, a representation, a label if you like, for something that I don't currently know or something that I want to generalize. And we give that letter a name. We call it either a variable, or we could also call it a pronumeral. Okay, so variable is kind of something that can change. Now clearly these values can change here, so variable is useful. Pronumeral literally means, well, pro means for and numeral means numbers. So it's like a letter representing a number. Now there are slightly more conventions than that. We can incorporate Greek letters quite a lot. We can incorporate our ordinary letters. We can incorporate capital letters. And we will see uses of those as we go along this course. But in general, all I want you to understand is that when we write a letter in maths, all that means is that it could be a number that goes there. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, some other useful topics, another useful notations that we can get around. I would never write this in algebra. I'd never write this in maths because there's no need. Like what this literally says is 2 times A. I'm mixing together letters and numbers. So I would just simply write this as 2A. Okay, so I skip out the multiplication symbol. It's a bit like I would never say 2 lots of apples. I would just say 2 apples. Hence, we wouldn't need to write the multiplication symbol. Similarly, I might have something like this, 3 divided by B. Now, I don't have to write 3 divided by B each time. I could just write it as a fraction, okay? So that's useful. I mean, if you think about it, the division symbol is kind of an empty fraction, like there's a number that can go here and there's a number that can go down there, okay? So instead of writing division, sometimes I'll write it as a fraction, and it's slightly easier to look at. Another convention then, if I have x and I multiply it by x and I multiply it by x, I don't have to write x times x times x all the time. I could just write this as x to the power of 3 or x cubed. Well, that literally means it's x multiplied by itself 3 times. Some other conventions which we might have, I mean, if I wanted to write b times e times 4, the way which we tend to write that, well, first of all, without the multiplication symbols, we've already seen that up here, Okay. But the way which we tend to write it is, number one, we'd put all the numbers first. So I'd write it with the 4 first. Then I tend to write it in alphabetical order. So all of my letters, E and B, I would write them in alphabetical order. So I would write that as 4, B, E. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense.